we're always learning and we're always growing. And so one thing I liked with the master's is it was part-time, so I could work during the master's. But one thing that people don't consider with doing a master's is the barrier to entry for an entry-level job is, sky high. Whereas if you're in a master's program, you can intern, which makes the barrier to entry for other jobs a lot easier because you have experience.
Excited to welcome Michael Galarnyk to the podcast this week. Michael is a Python and machine learning instructor for Stanford Continuing Studies, LinkedIn Learning, and more. You can find him on Twitter at GalarnykMichael and through his blog on Medium or through his YouTube channel. I'll link all of these things in the description of the video. I've seen quite a few podcast interviews with Michael in the past couple months, and I just had to have him on the show. In this video, we'll talk about the benefits of formal versus online education, the best ways to land a job. You'll also get to hear his story about when he made a course in a very peculiar place. Now on to the interview. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week. I love your background. You're obviously involved on YouTube, a lot of content creation stuff. And I think you bring some really valuable perspectives, specifically on learning, but also on kind of learning through the new and modern approaches like online courses, whatever that might be. So again, thank you for joining me today.
Of course, happy to be on.
Excellent. Well, what I generally like to do is to just let the listeners get familiar with you first. And the question that I love is how did you first get interested in data science? How did this field start kind of showing itself in front of you, and what was the thing that really got you hooked? I assume you're hooked.
Yeah, of course. I'm way hooked by now. So I did an undergrad in nanoengineering at UC San Diego, and nanoengineering is kind of like it sounds. It's like small stuff. So I did a lot of research as well in undergrad, and a lot of it was on micromotors for drug delivery, remediating, basically destroying nerve agents, and like did a bunch of papers on that. And if you Google me now, you can still find that sort of stuff. But one thing I kind of realized is even when I was working with remediating nerve agents and trying to do experiments to find out like how much do micromotors like help the mixing of fluids, like really kind of like esoteric kind of stuff. I realized that I was working with a lot of data. A lot of it was like merging Excel files and just doing some sort of data analysis and doing things strictly in Excel. And if you have a lot of sheets, it's not exactly always the most pleasant process, as you know. And then I realized I need some data skills. And also I needed a job, really, because my undergrad, it was very far from a lot of work and a lot of jobs in the marketplace. So I decided to do a master's in data science from UC San Diego. And that was a lot of fun. And that's kind of how I got started. And then I started making courses and a bunch of other stuff.
That's awesome. And so did you go straight from your undergraduate into that master's in data science degree?
I did. I did an internship over the summer at a company called Cymer, which I think is now ASML. Basically, they're the people that make the lasers that etch the chips in your phones and computers and stuff.
So I would love to hear more about how you made that decision. That's something I get asked a lot is, I want to do this right after undergrad. Is that a good idea? And, honestly, my sentiment is usually like try and get work experience first and use a master's. Like if you don't land the positions you want, like absolutely go and do it. But I also, if there is I don't have a great perspective on that because that's not what I did. So I'm definitely interested to hear what the thought process was there and how you ended up going down that route.
Well, it depends on what market you graduate in. Is the market doing well? It depends on how marketable you are as a person. So my undergrad in nanoengineering was not suitable for a lot of data science jobs. I didn't have a portfolio to showcase my skills. I didn't have skills themselves, really, which sounds terrible, but we're always learning and we're always growing. And so one thing I liked with the master's is it was part-time, so I could work during the master's. But one thing that people don't consider with doing a master's is the barrier to entry for an entry-level job is, sky high. Whereas if you're in a master's program, you can intern, which makes the barrier to entry for other jobs a lot easier because you have experience. Like, how do you get experience without experience? you know?
Yeah.
Like you need experience to get a job, but if you don't have experience, how do you get it? And that was one way around the, you need experience to get a job thing. So I intern, of course, you get paid usually when you're a data science intern because it's a high demand field, at least in theory. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that is so important.
Hmm.
The idea that so I kind of use my
Hmm.
one of my master's degrees in the same way is that you're one thing that you are getting with masters, obviously you have
Hmm.
in most cases you have to pay a reasonable amount, but you
Hmm.
get time and you get
Hmm.
opportunities. And I think that if you're doing one of these master's degrees, um, and you're not either doing a research or getting an internship, you're kind of squandering that opportunity, because those are the things, not necessarily the degree, but the
Hmm.
experience that you accumulate during the degree is, in my mind, what's going to set you up for a position after you graduate. And so, that's generally my advice for anyone going back is like, make sure you capitalize on it, you build your portfolio,
Hmm.
you try and land these intermediary positions, because
Hmm.
that's the experience people are looking for. People look at a degree and be like, great, like, have you done anything?
Exactly. And the big part about that is you can't necessarily intern if you aren't in college or if you aren't in some program. And if you just go for the high level entry level job, like you might not be able to get it. And then when you graduate, you can't just go back and be like, hey, I want to intern. That doesn't always fly, which is kind of sad in our kind of economy these days. Like you kind of need an internship to get an entry level job, and at
Yeah.
least it's a lot easier. Yeah.
Well, that surprises me. I would hope that in the future we'll start seeing a lot more internships available to people who have already graduated, because
Hmm.
for companies, it's like a try before you buy type of
Hmm.
thing. I don't think that that's a bad model. You get to a lot more out of evaluating an intern than you do from just the raw interview process. It's also a little bit more cost intensive and things like that, but it's an interesting. I'm fascinated that it's not more common that we don't have graduate internships or fellowships or co-ops or whatever it is.
I think it's just the way the workforce has been structured, really. I mean, it's hard to change old business practices. And like, that's one disadvantage about, doing a boot camp or an online program or whatever. Oftentimes, you can't intern, so it's harder to get that first job. So,
Yeah, and that I've seen a lot of really good projects come out of those, but
hmm.
uh, as sad as it is, I think most projects are not exactly the same
Hmm.
as real world work, which is, I guess, the nature of the game, right?
I mean, I know projects definitely help because I've written about it. I've gotten people reach out to me based on some project I made or some like Medium article I wrote. It's like, hey, do you want to interview for this job? So it does happen. It's just you're making things harder than they need to be necessarily. Assuming that you kind of figured out in your last year of undergrad, for example, that you want to do data science. And one thing about like internships people also forget is like they're graduating, let's say in June. Let's say someone here is graduating in June this year. Some companies will take interns, starting in June, even if you're graduating senior or, in masters or whatever. And while it's great to get that full-time job, apply for both. Apply for internships, apply for full-time, apply for literally everything. You need that first job to get a job.
I could not agree more. I think that we should always be trying to get the opportunities that could lead to something greater. I mean, we shouldn't be looking at internships or jobs as stepping stones, but at the
Hmm.
same time, you know, don't be sold on just like a data science internship.
Hmm.
Like a software engineering internship
Hmm.
is a lot closer to data science than no internship, right?
Hmm. Yeah, of
Same thing with the
course.
data analysis internship. I mean, you have to make the steps career wise that are moving forward towards. I mean, I think data science is not a great goal, because
Hmm.
career wise, it's always moving forward. You're always having to learn. There's no end to learning
Hmm.
data science or that progress, but um, you always got to just like make the move that puts you forward in a small way, even if it's not the one exactly that you want, right?
Yeah, and a job isn't forever, right? Like, I mean, most jobs you don't stay at for longer than 3 years or 5 years at, max. Sometimes people stay for a year
Especially
these
in
days with
tech.
contract roles, you
Yeah.
know? And also, sorry, follow up on your point about like, even if it's a data analyst internship or computer science, oftentimes people don't necessarily call their, data science type jobs or roles actually data science. So some companies, it's always been like data analytics specialist or, you know, computer science, but really doing data science work. So it's all about the transferable skills, not necessarily the title itself, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, that kind of boils down to, I guess we're kind of jumping a
mhm,
little bit into the resume and those types of
yeah.
things. But, when I review a resume, again, granted, I haven't reviewed a resume in like about a year,
Hmm.
but I don't look at the titles of the position. Oh, I like glance at it. What I look at is what they did in the role, what type of um, like outcomes that they created. And if the outcomes are data focused, like, you know, what do I care about what they were called? I mean, same thing with the degree. If I look at someone, let's say they have a master's in information systems, and I see all their coursework is related to machine learning,
Hmm.
what do I care what the master's degree was in? I care what they took while they were there and what they learned when they were there. Um,
Hmm.
and I think just people get so wrapped up in naming conventions and what it's called.
Hmm.
You don't realize how much flexibility you have when you're describing these things.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people like, oh, I need a data, science masters, or I need an AI masters or machine learning masters. I'm like, yeah, but what about the actual skills? Like, are you sure you're actually learning what you want to learn there, right?
Yeah. Well, I've been getting a lot of questions recently. I guess it's that time of year that
Hmm.
uh, people are applying to these programs and they're like, which one is
Hmm.
better? Which one is worse? What should I be taking? And to me, I mean, I can't go through all the programs,
Hmm.
right? But I can tell you, like, look at what courses they are. And if they're
Hmm.
things that you think would be useful, or you like
Hmm.
look at some job descriptions and you see things that are matching up, like to me, it's like, well,
Hmm.
you analyzed it effectively. um,
Yeah.
Myself telling you what to do based on your situation is not going to be the best approach. It has to be way more personalized than that.
I mean, there's also like reviews of courses online, even for masters, boot camps, especially. Like you can go on, I forget, like for boot camps, for example, maybe it's Course Hero, whatever it is.
Interesting.
You can just Google online and find out, is this boot camp good for what I want to do? You can also for master's programs, you can go on Reddit and people have talked about like the Georgia Tech, master's computer science program on there. Like you can always find information about programs online. Like, are they updated? Are or are they teaching, 10 years old, and not functional?
Yeah.
So it's a great point you make.
Yeah. Well, also, there's no harm in reaching out to people associated
Yeah,
with
of
those
course.
things. If someone asks me about the programs that I did, they're like,
Hmm.
you know, did you enjoy taking this course, or like,
Hmm.
did you think it was worth it? I'll usually say, like, for me, yes, because I had very specific goals. I like recently made a video about why I chose my specific program, but people will
Hmm.
realize that like my decision making process would have been completely irrational for someone else that wanted different things. Like,
Hmm.
I wanted a program where I could explore a lot of software engineering because I've always been very interested in entrepreneurship, and I wanted
Hmm.
to have some of those skills if I needed it. It turns out I'm like not good at software development, but or not good yet. Or if I wanted to be, I probably could be with a lot of study. I'm trying to focus on my like self speak,
Hmm.
but it's that conversation, that thought, it just has to be so specific to you, and people don't realize how unique their cases are often.
Hmm.
All right, let's move on. I would love to start hearing more about how you got interested in the content creation, especially kind of the blogging and the course creation. That's something I've obviously dabbled in, but you're quite a bit further along down those lines than I am, and I'm always fascinated with, like, why does someone put something on the internet for others to read or listen to?
Well, it starts from my undergrad not being marketable in any way, shape, or form, really. Uh, I didn't have a lot of programming skills in my undergrad. I was basically doing a lot of like chemistry and biology type of work, material science, but what I was doing is very similar. And one thing I realized is like I need to have things online to have proof, especially since my undergrad was so very different than what I wanted to do with my life. So I started, writing blogs and making like very simple YouTube videos. Someone was also automating my, life a little bit because someone's like, oh, how do you install this? And rather than me just doing it for 10 different people or 20 different people or whatever, I just, made a video. And a lot of the simplest videos actually end up getting me, people like, oh, I really like your blog on, really simple X or really simple Y. And it led to people contacting me like, hey, can you make a course for us? or like, hey, would you mind teaching this, or would you mind assisting this class or whatever, because I had content online, and that brought me interest in content creation jobs. And for the course I made a couple courses on LinkedIn Learning. Like I wrote an article on box plots, for example, like pretty simple things. I wrote it very much in depth. And I had someone from Madecraft who like makes LinkedIn Learning classes, for example, reach out to me about like, hey, can you make a class on data visualization? We like your visuals in, X article. And I'm like, sure, that's fine. I'll make a course. In the past, though, I also made a course for UC San Diego. They have an extension school there, and that was on data analytics. And partly why they wanted me was I've already made things. There's so much proof that I can make content. Maybe not the best content. Like my YouTube, definitely I should put actual effort into that, especially since I don't, post regularly. But that's how it kind of led to that. And I really enjoy it now because by the process of making content, you're learning in a lot of ways. You're firming up your ideas, you're making sure your assumptions are valid. And by students telling you, like, hey, you're not clear here, I learn, how to be clearer and how to be more concise, in theory, at least.
Well, that's awesome. One thing I really want to highlight in that is the idea of proof, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard for a lot of people to evaluate skills. It's really hard to say, is someone going to be a good data scientist, right? Is someone going to be a good communicator? And if you're putting stuff out there from a blog post, for example, I can generally see how you think a little bit. I can see how you communicate. I mean, I would say most communication in an office, especially nowadays, is via email, via Slack, via writing. And if you can see that this person is a very clear writer, to an employer, that stands out as like, wow, like I don't have to worry about muddled messages or whatever that is when we're working together. And it's unbelievable the amount of, I guess, different skills that you show through these different platforms. I love. I mean, I haven't really looked for a job in the last couple years, but if someone were to see my YouTube channel before I interviewed, they'd know how I speak. They'd understand my diction. They'd understand some of the idiosyncrasies I have with my communication. But it's like they already met me for the most part. And the familiarity concept, that aspect is so important for an interview. Would you rather hire? Well, most people probably wouldn't recommend hiring their friends, but would you rather hire someone that you know and that you can kind of vouch for and see their track record, or would you hire some kind of random person off the street? That one little extra layer of trust, I feel like just goes so far.
And you have so much demonstrated proof, like if I was hiring you to make, YouTube content or to talk about data science or data science careers, like there's clear proof you've done it, and, your sports analytics work, same thing, like, or whatever you do what do you actually do for your day job these days?
So I'm still doing the sports analytics stuff.
Okay.
So consulting in that realm, still basketball and mostly golf. Yeah.
And like your work experience is, proof that you've done something. But if you, wrote about sports analytics and you never had a job before, people be like, oh, this person happens to know what they're doing,
Yeah. Well, people think, I've had a lot of people think they're like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore after I get a job. And that's true to a certain extent, right? Like once you have a data science job, it's a lot easier to get another data science job because someone has validated that you're quote unquote like data science worthy, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you keep producing this stuff on the side, there are so many positive externalities that come out of it, whether it's speaking, whether it's like, like yourself, the courses, whatever that might be. To me, there's no reason not to, because at least for me, it's stuff I'd be doing anyway. And I'm just documenting it and sharing it with the world. And so
yeah, of course.
You're getting just like economies of scope from just putting stuff out there that you're going to do anyway.
And because I did something for LinkedIn Learning, then that's how I met John David Arianson, and he was on your podcast, I believe, or he'll be on your podcast, but not released yet.
We've exchanged podcasts. Really, really interesting guys. I'll link that for any of the viewers as well.
Yeah, and like his podcast is how to get an analytics job or data analytics job, and like that's how I met him. And because of John David and being on his podcast, someone's like, "Hey, can you make a course for us?" And I'm like, Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm kind of tired at the moment because of, COVID, but, sure. Uh, and it all builds on itself. Like every article I write, as long as I put some effort into it, like I get people reach out to me like, hey, I really liked your article, or like, hey, we really need, what you do exactly at our company, or do you want to be a developer advocate, or do you want to, teach data science? And in some cases, like, hey, we want you to be a data scientist here or interview for this job. It helps so much.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, I will say the biggest takeaway I've had from having, some semblance
Mhm.
of a network, whether it's
Yeah.
YouTube, whether it's LinkedIn, is that the opportunities that come to you
Hmm.
are a lot better than the ones that you go out and reach. Like you might really want to a specific position,
Hmm.
and that's great, but like it's completely pushed from your end,
Hmm.
right? If a company is reaching out to you and you also are interested in working there,
Hmm.
the synergy is so much higher that the odds you get it are so much higher. The
Hmm.
odds that they'll be willing to concede some things or give you exactly what you want out of the opportunity are
Hmm.
so much higher because they have that initial genuine interest. You don't have to manufacture interest. You don't have to sell yourself,
Hmm.
which that's not something. One of the reasons I create all this content is I don't like selling myself. I think in certain situations I can be good at it,
Hmm.
but that is not my favorite thing to do. I'd rather it's like, hey, you want to work with me? I love that. I
Hmm.
like working with people that want to work with me.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, there's a lot of positive effects with that versus, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, like, hey, could you give me a job? Like, want a referral. I haven't actually looked in your website to see if you have jobs available, but, I really think you should give me one. It's a lot less powerful of a message, you
Oh,
know?
I saw a comment the other day that was, hey, can you like make a video or can you show me how to learn data science from zero to being an expert step by step? And it's like, come on, guys, we got to put in some work here. Like
Hmm.
like part of this process is um, whether it's learning data science or getting
Hmm.
a job, whatever it is, it's like it's user driven. Like you're not going
Hmm.
to be a good data scientist if you want someone to do all the work for you, or you're not going to do your homework, you're not going to do your research. That's like the fun of data science is that you got to dig into these problems. And same with the interview process or
Hmm.
getting a job is that, I mean, for me, I like the part of where I create stuff and they come to me. Like
Hmm.
some people love the thrill of being like, I beat out these 400 other candidates for this position, and you can like gamify it and make it fun, right? I mean, again, not my cup of tea, but some people like love that portion of it.
Yeah, I might be one of those people that likes being interviewed. I think it's not in terms of like, get the job necessarily, but I do enjoy the process of looking for jobs because I've had to teach getting jobs before. Like,
Makes you a better
like
teacher.
how do you ask someone for a referral? You not just, like, hey, here's my resume I just randomly sent to you in this generic LinkedIn message. It's like, go on the website, see what they're looking for, find the actual job title you're looking for, because not every company has a data scientist. It could be, applied scientists, something job title. And then like, here's the job I'm interested in person. Here's why I'm a good fit, and XYZ,
Yeah.
and like a bunch of other things also, building actual relationships with people, not just trying to, get something really quickly out of people.
Yeah. Well, that's
Hmm.
that's something I've really realized and I've started to enjoy is that,
Hmm.
I get eh, now quite a few messages, comments, whatever that might be. And I find it really meaningful when someone is um they care in the sense
Hmm.
that like research the person as well.
Hmm.
So when I'm reaching out to someone, if I hypothetically if I were to, it's like, well, what has their position been like? What is their journey to get to this position? Like maybe I went to the same school with them.
Hmm.
Maybe just a little bit more context around them and making the conversation, even if it's about a role,
Hmm.
like add a little bit of their flavor to it. That sounded a little weird, but
Yeah, about people putting in efforts. Same thing with
exactly.
personal relationships. You put in no effort to a personal relationship, it might not go as well as if you put in some effort, in any way, shape, or form.
Shocker.
Yeah.
All right. So I've been meaning to ask about the course creation and the idea of a lot of online
Hmm.
resources. So you've made quite a few courses now.
Yeah.
You've also obviously done a master's degree
Hmm.
related to data science. You know, I have some thoughts on this, but I really want your perspective on just the differences between learning through those two mediums. Um, is one better than the other, or is it kind of a situational thing? What are some of the pluses and minuses of kind of each side?
So everything is situational, as you know, as you mentioned earlier in this
Hopefully,
episode.
hopefully we'll beat it to death because it's so important.
Yeah. So for a master's, there's the time aspect, as you mentioned earlier. Like you can have the opportunity to intern and get actual experience while you're going through a master's program or a PhD or undergrad or whatever. So that's an essential part that people often forget about. So that's really, really essential. So a master's is typically seen, at least for data science roles, as a easier stepping stone to a job because that's what employers traditionally look for. Uh, and so that's changing though. That's those sort of things are changing all the time. And this advice, I'm sure, will change, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever. And with the master's, you kind of just learn everything. You don't really have much of a choice in some cases. You're like, here's the 12 classes you need to graduate or whatever. You do have some choice in electives or whatever, and that could be very valuable for customizing your own learning. A disadvantage of a master's is like a lot of content creators, we're not always incentivized to update content. And especially at major research institutions like big schools, oftentimes professors, to say this nicely, their incentive structure for their jobs is not to improve their coursework, at a relatively frequent level. So you can be learning really old things
That was
or
very
quote how
nicely
things are
put.
broken. So that's a disadvantage. Whereas for like online course creation or online content, if you take like Coursera class or LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or whatever, the instructors are more often incentivized to keep their content current because if it's not current, you have bad reviews and you make less money as a course instructor. Usually, there are some courses that just have never been updated. They still get money, but that's just kind of how it is. But one advantage of online learning, which I really like, and this is true even for me these days, is very modular. So if you want to learn X or you want to learn more in detail about Flask, for example, and serving machine learning model for whatever reason, you can do that. You can find a course on it and just go through it. And you don't have to learn about, 2 years of a program and take a bunch of courses you're not interested in. You can learn about specifically what you're interested when you're interested. And that's a big thing. Disadvantage of courses, yeah, I mentioned earlier. Yeah, they're not as necessarily impressive on a resume usually. Same thing with boot camps, but at least with like boot camps, they're short, and with online courses, they're relatively short. So you can get out in the workforce faster, ideally, in an ideal situation. So,
Awesome. Well, I
mhm.
think one other thing I'd like to bring up is usually the cost associated with these
Mhm.
things. So
Yeah, of
master's
course.
degrees are far more expensive.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
facing you know, upwards of six figures of debt from the two that I did. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, I was in a position where, I have a job, I can pay these things off. But at the
Hmm.
same time, from any of these things, there is no guarantee of a job,
Of
right?
course.
So yeah, I think going through a master's program, your odds of landing a like true data science position out of school are significantly higher.
Hmm.
But if we're looking at the certificate route, landing a analyst position, landing a kind of lower level position, and working your way
Hmm.
up to a data scientist position in 2 years, I would say that the odds of going that route and getting into data science, although you have to do one like at least one more step in the chain, but the
Hmm.
time frames or whatever it is, like they're probably not that different.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously I had to go the master's route because that's kind of how my brain works for learning.
Hmm.
Sometimes you need to put a little skin in the game or have have a little bit more structure for you to
Hmm.
learn effectively. That's how I am. But I mean, that's how I was. I think now I'd be able to go a
Hmm.
different route, but again, situational, right?
Yeah, the cost is a big one. Also, I think one thing we always talk about, like, oh, you should do a master's, you should do, boot camp or, do some online course. It's all about which master's or which online course or which boot camp has, yeah, you need to look at the reviews for these things, talk to people that have done them, and find out if they're appropriate. Because it's very easy to say in advertising, like, oh, you'll get a job from this master's program, 100%, uh, yeah, you better check these, these facts and figures and talk to people. And, maybe it was true 10 years ago, but is it true today?
Yeah. Well, you see
So,
that a lot out of boot camps.
mm-hmm,
And I think what people don't realize is that, yes, they like might guarantee a job, right? But
mm-hmm,
it's not a data science job,
mm-hmm,
right? Like they have a lot of placement into maybe PM roles, or maybe into data analyst roles, or maybe something not even like data related,
mm-hmm.
but they still count those in their metrics.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's also is a regulation around metrics for any platform or any course, like, and also is a guarantee for any of these sorts type of like options, like how do they give you the money back? It's a guarantee. Do you have to apply for a year? Do you have to apply for 6 months? uh do I count, yeah, any job, like you said, not just an analyst job, but is it any minimum wage job? So always be
Lesson.
careful, always verify facts. And that's part of data science, actually, is verifying things in data
True.
and doing research on data. So it's a good job skill also just to verify things.
So I think lesson learned is read the fine print, right?
Read the fine print, contact people that have done things, ask them. Like, I have people ask me about my master's program all the time on LinkedIn. So, yeah.
I could not agree more. So, one thing that with the course creation I've always been interested in is
Mm-hmm.
what have you learned about the process of learning in general from doing that? Um, whether it's helped you to solidify your data science knowledge more, or whether that's um, you know helped you to teach others better. What have you learned either from the feedback or from putting these things together that might have surprised you?
A lot of good content is really just about the effort that you put in. Because oftentimes, if people, for certain tasks just going underneath the scenes of course creation, people often pay you for content. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll always be good content. So there's some courses out there that people just pay for content, people get done as fast as possible, get the paycheck, if it's just like a flat fee. And that's kind of a little like not great thing about course content in general for some places. But I've learned a lot about like how students learn by them coming to me like, hey, there's some error in your content, or this needs to be updated because this installation process changed, or this method changed or whatever. So I learn like how to update my content, how to be super clear by my students coming back to me, or my blog post readers or my course content people coming back to me. I have also learned about how to structure things. I think the biggest thing I learned about course creation and that sort of thing from all this process is getting people started is the hardest. So it's getting people, not struggling from the first video is the most important thing. Like, can they get, Python installed? Could they get, Google Colab working if you're using that? Can you get them past, day one? And then the process is a lot easier, because oftentimes we just want to get to the exciting part, the machine learning or deep learning or whatever. And I find a lot of course creators, like I've been guilty of this before too. We spend less time on the less fun stuff and the stuff that we're interested in ourselves. And so I've learned, spend time helping people get off the ground, you know. So
That's something I definitely I think I could probably work on quite a bit as
mhm,
well. So yeah, that's a really good piece of insight. That's not something that I always think about. Oh, like where's the meat of this? But
mhm,
I mean, if you think of a YouTube video, it's the same thing. Is that if people are lost in the first couple seconds,
mhm.
they're just going to click off.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
whether it's they're not interested, they don't like you, or whatever it might be. Um, but yeah, it's I would almost say it's like important to kind of front load a little bit. Is that, hey, how do we make this, the production or whatever it is as useful as possible in the beginning? And if they reach a certain threshold, they're probably going to be in for the the long run at this point.
Yeah, and they'll be less frustrated, and they're not gonna have to go to another place that doesn't spend as much effort in the beginning either. Like, it's very additive.
Very true.
Hmm.
Awesome. So obviously you've mentioned LinkedIn Learning,
Hmm.
but I'm interested in how LinkedIn as a platform in general um, has impacted your career, how you use the platform. You have a ton of followers there. I
Hmm.
think you might be edging me out just by a few. So anyone listening, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. You're welcome to follow Michael as well. But that platform is something that I've been on, but I don't
Hmm.
think that I've necessarily maximized my engagement there. Um,
Hmm.
I'm a little worried because it's so big and vast that I'd get lost, and divided attention for me is bad for business. So I'd love to learn more about that space from you.
So the big thing about LinkedIn is really just filling out your profile. I think a lot of people just, have a LinkedIn to say they have a LinkedIn. They don't necessarily put, photos on their LinkedIn of who they are, like, profile photo. There's no description of like anything about them. There's just a job title, not necessarily like what they did at a job. And I don't put it for all my jobs either, because at this point I'm getting more than enough attention that I want. By the way, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just from like recruiters, it's a lot these days. It never used to be that way. Before it was like I could beg, for hours for a job, but just be hoping, but no one to reach out. Uh,
It's a flip switches
yeah,
somewhere, and
put a skills section. Uh, pro people search, for people they're looking to like hire on LinkedIn. If you don't have any skills section on your LinkedIn, or you don't have anything in your description section, with Python or R or, machine learning, you're harder to search. And that's one way people often get jobs is people reach out to you, like you said earlier in this podcast. So that's a major one. And as far as how it's influenced my career, oftentimes people will, say, oh, I really enjoyed your course. And they'll share like, I've completed, Python for data visualization or whatever my course is called on LinkedIn. And, and, I'll be like, oh, congratulations or whatever. So that's a follower that way, or people are more likely to find me that way. It's also people like that reach out to me over LinkedIn. Like, I liked your blog, that's cool. And they happen to be from big companies sometimes, which is surprising because I write about very basic things. So I think we also have like imposter syndrome as people. Like, oh, how is that person from that, amazing company saying they really like my blog on, really simple X or really simple Y or environment management or whatever. So that's really helped my career a lot because it's given me some validation that I'm doing stuff relatively correctly, but it's also helped people reach out to me for jobs. Like the LinkedIn Learning stuff came because I had filled out LinkedIn and a really good blog. They can find me after they read an article. Uh, I think there's also, it's not just LinkedIn, it's links that lead to your LinkedIn. So if people find some, interesting project you made in GitHub, people found me from my GitHub to my LinkedIn, or they found me from my blog to my LinkedIn. And that's how they were able to reach out to me for some job opportunity or just to say thank you or to, tell me how terrible I am in extreme cases. But you generally get more wonderful people than the opposite.
yeah, I think that's so true. And what people don't realize about LinkedIn is that, I mean, people are genuinely just like interested in exploring. Recruiters are always on there,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have a profile, you're going to be able, and you have
Mm-hmm.
keywords, you're related to data science, like someone's going to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing. I mean, I think one area of the LinkedIn profile that's underutilized is the kind of about me statement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's something I don't recommend putting on a resume, but
Mm-hmm.
like it's very well accepted on LinkedIn. And you should talk about yourself. You should talk about the things you enjoy. People love a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if a recruiter likes your story, which they can see either through your LinkedIn profile, through your blog post, through any of
Mm-hmm.
these things, they'll probably reach out to you. What's the risk on their end, right? Is
Yeah,
a little bit
none.
of their time. So,
Yeah,
um,
and that's also something that people like that's searchable from LinkedIn side too. Like people often get skills from those sections, they have data scientists at LinkedIn. They're pretty good at parsing text, you know? So that's part of their algorithm is
Yeah.
those about me or descriptions or whatever they call it these days. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you can go overboard, but
Hmm.
you rarely see someone go overboard. More is usually valuable.
Yes, definitely. 100%.
So one thing, I apologize for jumping around a little bit.
Sure.
One thing we talked about offline was your most interesting course creation experience. I would love to hear just a little story. This gave me a really good chuckle when I heard about it the first time. So I feel like it's only fair to share it with the listeners. You created a course in a very unique place, huh?
Yes. So normally when you agree to do a course, there's under certain assumptions that are almost always going to be true. Like you're going to be in a studio or you can record it at home. But then plans change, especially now during COVID. So I was in, let's say, Palm Springs area, just visiting my family and taking care of some stuff. And I was going to go to Santa Barbara to record a course, but that, you know, essentially was just never going to happen during COVID because you have to speak and, enunciate, and projecting's not great for, not spreading COVID, or projecting is bad for, right now because you can spread COVID, other stuff, and be in the same room and, be in a non well ventilated area to record.
Yeah.
So I was in Palm Springs and I essentially was in Airbnb for COVID based reasons. And I couldn't find anywhere to record in the area that was open. I didn't really have much equipment. And so I ended up recording a LinkedIn Learning class. It's actually on LinkedIn right now, Machine Learning with Python, or Machine Learning with Scikit-learn. And I was in the bathroom the entire time. I opened up I don't know what they call place where people store towels, and I basically hung some moving blankets. I moved a table from like the kitchen into the bathroom. Like I soundproofed the bathroom, and recorded an entire course, like all 20 something videos. Oh my God, that was long. That was a long time because I promised to do a course, so I had to do the course.
Oh my goodness. Well, for anyone who's watching the YouTube version, I'm gonna try and
Hmm.
put a couple of the pictures you sent me on the screen there, because that to me is the funniest thing. Is that you hear the water running or something in the background. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you soundproofed it, but I mean, even here, like there's wind issues. I mean, it's hard to get good quality sound. I'm probably gonna maybe one day if I ever make it get a podcasting soundproof studio or something. But
Yeah,
no,
nothing is ever soundproof. Nothing. So, and it was also, I forget what they're called. There's a season like every couple years where bugs make noises in trees. So cicadas, I think they are. So that
okay.
was going off, and like just all these sounds. Plus, it was an Airbnb, and so there wasn't always perfect noise. I think the thing people forget is that in any sort of job, things don't always go the way you planned,
Especially data science.
especially data science. Data sets are not what they're promised, or people's goals are not aligned with the data. Or if you're making courses and you don't have a soundproof area, you have to make your own. And you can have to spend entire days in the bathroom. And to get into the bathroom, uh, you have to, squeeze through the door because all your soundproofing things in the way.
I love it.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll have as creative a story like that as for making a YouTube video.
It's gonna
Um,
happen if you're traveling.
yeah.
I promise you it'll happen at some point.
Yep. Well, we'll see when that happens next. But all right. Well, Michael, this has been incredible. At the end of all of these interviews, I leave the
Mhm.
floor open to the guest, you, to talk
Mhm.
about really anything you want. It could either be parting words of advice, how to reach you,
Mhm.
uh, any causes or projects you're working on. It's fun to kind of peel back the layer further and let people know what's going on in your life.
So as far as advice, I think one of the biggest things I can just recommend people looking for jobs or just people starting out or anything is to have proof of what you do. Kind of talked about this in this episode. Is it's one thing saying you can do something, it's another thing actually showing them and actually having demonstratable proof. So portfolio, please build a portfolio. You'll save yourself a lot of time. You don't necessarily 100% need one, but it really does help. Other advice in terms of just career advice, the time to look for a job is not when you really need one. i.e. when you get laid off, because it does happen. So, make effort before you need a job to network, to make friends, to build your online presence, to, touch up your skills, and also look at what's on the job market, like what skills you need to learn to get a new job. And then as far as me, you can find me on Twitter at Galarnyk Michael. You can find me on LinkedIn, LinkedIn Learning, Python for data visualization, 15 tips to get a data science job, like a bunch of courses. If you want to see them, great. If not, that's cool too. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat with people. So that's about it.
Awesome. Well, if you're watching this on YouTube, Michael's Twitter will be just under his picture.
Mm-hmm.
Though also everything, his YouTube channel, his LinkedIn, his Twitter will all
Mm-hmm.
be pinned in the first comment when I wake
Mm-hmm.
up to do that, and also in the description. So
Yeah.
thank you again, Michael. I really enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll talk again very soon.
I hope to hear from you soon. And thanks for having me on. I always like chatting.
Awesome.